If you have a GX470 with navigation and the Mark Levinson stereo, this is how you can easily add an aftermarket radio with wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. This one just happens to be 10 inches and it can swivel. Since the climate controls, radio, and other functions all run through the Lexus infotainment system, you can't just easily upgrade the radio. You must add a few pieces of hardware to integrate your new radio with the Lexus system. Here are the components needed. First, we have our nice new radio. The new radio will come with its own harness that is meant to connect to your vehicle's wiring, and it plugs right into the back of the radio. For the second component, we'll need a device that can interface with the factory amplifier. This is the device that makes your new radio work by communicating with the factory amp. The third component is an optional steering wheel control adapter if you want to make your steering wheel buttons work with the new radio. And that's it. Those are the three main components you'll need to get the new radio working. I begin by removing a few trim pieces to get to the bolts that hold the factory infotainment center in place. And this one, it's easy to start right there or under the seat. Next will be these two trim pieces on either side, that one and that one. And you just gently start pulling from the bottom, and it just has tension retainers. Of course, there's a harness for the buttons that you'll need to unplug. Okay, next up is the storage and ashtray area. This thing just pulls out as well to separate it. And you don't actually have to remove it completely. You can just kind of leave it hanging there. And then the whole centerpiece, the navigation, the climate controls, and radio is held in by 4 bolts. But one there, one there, one there, one there. And there's also a bolt holding the harness plug in, so you'll have to undo that. These are all 10mm bolts. And then the infotainment center just pulls out, and then you'll have to unplug it. My boy. And there you have it. That's what it looks like with the whole radio and infotainment system removed. Here was the bulk of the connectors that you had to disconnect. Each one has a little tab that you squeeze down before you pull the plug out. So this is what the radio and infotainment center looks like outside of the vehicle from the back side. The navigation plugs are up here. We won't be messing with any of those. Those plug back in. This is like a clock and temp info. But down here is the factory single-DIN radio. It's nice that this part of the harness disconnects from the vehicle with this big plug and that bolt that we undid earlier. This part of the harness is going to plug into the BeatSonic amp adapter. I'm going to remove the single-DIN radio. There's only 4 bolts holding it in. These are 10mm as well. 2 on this side and 2 on this side. I will also have to remove a few bolts that hold in this bracket because the factory radio has a little plastic trim piece and you have to pull it out from the back side. So we need a little more space. This bracket will easily come off and we'll be able to wiggle it out of there. Alright, that's what the new single DIN head unit looks like installed. It also had this trim ring, but I don't think it really fits with the Lexus trim on there. So it may not really be necessary. Plus there's going to be a giant screen covering this. The little inserts that came with the BeatSonic do fit nicely, and that plugs the gaps that was there. So now all we have left is to hook up all the harnesses to the back and we can install it. I extended a couple of the chassis ground wires by about a foot, but I should have added maybe 2 feet of wire because it was a little bit of a stretch to get to where they needed to go. Although at first glance, all you see are a bunch of wires everywhere, the install of the MVA81 amplifier interface by BeatSonic is very simple to install. The device feels really well built, and BeatSonic puts lots of effort into making the instructions very detailed. They even covered the trim removal, radio install, and even provided a wiring diagram for the steering wheel controls adapter. They provide male and female crimp-on plugs because the instructions emphasize that they do not want you to cut, splice, or solder their harness, because doing so will void the warranty. One side of the BeatSonic harness has 4 speaker wires that plug into the new head unit harness, and the other side plugs right into the connectors for the Lexus harness. The radio harness had a few more wires than the BeatSonic, but they were for reverse, the parking brake, and power antenna, all of which I was able to cap, and everything seems to work fine. I'm utilizing the factory backup cam, which works with the factory infotainment screen. If I added a new backup camera, I could connect it right to the new radio, and I would probably need to connect that reverse wire. Next, I was ready to connect the steering wheel control adapter. The adapter has a power, ground, and 2 signal wires that piggyback off of the Lexus harness. So the instruction diagram is a picture of the back of the Lexus connector where the wires come out, not the pin and connector side. I know this because I also purchased a spliceless adapter for the Access steering wheel control that I was able to use as sort of a cheat sheet. I originally bought this to use with the Access amp interface, but of course that does not work with our vehicles. The BeatSonic is one of the few options that does work with our vehicles. You can't use the spliceless steering wheel control harness with the BeatSonic since you need to tap into the Lexus harness on the Lexus side and not the BeatSonic side. Since the steering wheel control adapter is universal, it will likely have a bunch of extra wires for other vehicles. I had to cut and tape a lot of the available wires on the steering wheel control harness. Again, I only used 4 wires, a power, a ground, and 2 signal wires. Alright, I know it looks like there's a lot going on here, but I'll kind of recap just to kind of break things down. So starting with the MVA81 BeatSonic adapter, this end of the harness, it had the 3 plugs that plugged into the Toyota or Lexus harness already. So that was pretty straightforward. There were also just a handful of wires that they supplied some butt connectors for, and those I crimped onto the new head unit's harness, pigtail harness thing coming out. So that's that end of the BeatSonic adapter. On this end, it basically just had the front left and right speakers, and those also spliced into that new head unit harness. This is the steering wheel control adapter. It basically just had a power, a ground, and then there were 2 signal wires that I jumped off of the factory Toyota harness. There were 2 wires coming out of the plug, so the wires out of the steering wheel control unit had to go to the corresponding wires on the diagram. Each harness also has some chassis grounds, so I'll be connecting those once I get them into the car. I try to wrap these up to make it a little neater, but basically you got your chassis grounds going there. You've got the BeatSonic adapter, we've got a steering wheel control unit, new head unit, and that's most of it. The radio also came with a external GPS antenna, so I'll be connecting that and probably mounting that to the dash, or hopefully inside the dash somewhere. And I'm not sure if I'll need it just yet, but it also came with a microphone, so I'll probably go ahead and plug that in. One other thing to mention, your replacement head unit might have microphone input, front and rear camera, and this has a wired Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, so like a data input, and then USB charging output. So I'll run that somewhere and maybe get a nice flush mounted receptacle thing later to plug into the car, but the wire will just be hanging there for now. So yeah, that's pretty much it. The next steps are to just reinstall the whole infotainment center radio piece, stuff these wires somewhere. I may end up kind of wrapping these up and taping them just so it's a little bit neater going back in, something like that. That makes it look a little cleaner. Yeah, here we go. Before I could reinstall the radio, I had to install the microphone and GPS antenna. Although I didn't get it on film, I spent some time routing my microphone to the factory location. With some patience, I'm sure you could do that pretty easily. Microphone wire in there. Microphone is in there. Tucked the cable under the headliner, pulled off this pillar cover, ran it behind there, dropped it down, ran it under this little trim piece, and fished it through. I used this stiff wire and a piece of tape to fish it through a hole down there. And that's the microphone wire. The GPS, let's see. Mounted the GPS antenna there. Tucked the wire. Oops. Here's the wire. Tucked it back there. Ran it to come out of this hole because that's where the radio pokes through. And yeah, just gotta connect those and slide everything else in. Now it was finally time to slide all the cabling and adapters into the dash, connect all the plugs, and install the assembly back into the dash. I disassembled the old cigarette lighter and ran the USB data and charge cable through the hole, which is nice and tucked away. Alright, I've got the infotainment system and the radio back in place. As you can see here, those are all the ground wires, the chassis grounds I've got going to that radio bolt, which is grounded to the frame. All 4 bolts are back in place, the harness is tight. Now I'm going to attach the head unit, test it out before I put the trim back in place. I now have a nice modern radio with wireless Android and wireless Apple CarPlay compatibility. It also has a huge screen that I can swivel and move up and down to more easily access the buttons behind it. The BeatSonic adapter integrates perfectly with the factory speakers and everything sounds great. It's so nice to be able to update our old SUV with modern conveniences. Thank you so much for watching this video, and please leave a comment if you have any questions about the process.